Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. We're going to start our evening's program. Obviously, please continue enjoying your dinner. I would ask you, though, if you could, just to postpone your conversations as much as possible until after the panel and until tomorrow morning. We've promised everyone that we're going to finish on time, not that it's going to allow those of you who are hoping to catch some of Bill Clinton's remarks in Charlotte. I think you probably won't be able to do that unless you're watching, on your iPods or something like that. I'm Elliot Gerson. I had a chance to meet many of you, all of you, from the stage earlier, and many of you at the break. From the Aspen Institute. I'm delighted to be here and look forward to future collaboration with the ULI. We're going to kick off this discussion this evening with a short conversation with two people who are extraordinarily well accomplished as leaders, and we're going to be talking about leadership in the context of culture and innovation. As scholars and as real-world innovators themselves. And the broad topic for this evening's conversation is that concept of leadership. The kind of leadership, political and otherwise, entrepreneurial leadership, nonprofit leadership, but the kind of leadership that's critical to sponsor, attract, nourish, cultivate, and promote an innovative entrepreneurial culture. You have their biographies, or at least you had them in their program, so I'll be very brief to allow us time to have a conversation, and let all of you know that a key point of this is to give you an opportunity to engage in the conversation, so please be thinking of questions. After we have a short conversation, we're going to open it up to all of you. We'll have a microphone, so be thinking of questions that you'd like to ask. Greg Horowitz, to my far right, is the co-founder and director of Global Connect, a think tank at UCSD that's focused on the development of innovative economies. He's also a leading venture capitalist, an entrepreneur himself, an advisor to governments, to businesses and nonprofits. He's someone we know very well at the Aspen Institute. He is something called an innovation systems architect who inhabits each of the key worlds that are critical to economic vitality. Tom Murphy, you heard briefly introduced at the cocktail hour, holds a chair for urban development at the ULI. He is, of course, the widely respected and hugely successful former mayor of Pittsburgh, and as such, he knows directly what it takes to make creative and vital cities. In his decade as mayor, he transformed that great city in almost every way imaginable. And interestingly and very impressively, his accomplishments led to his key role with the ULI and also made him ideally suited to his critical work rebuilding the Gulf Coast. So let's just begin our conversation and maybe with you, Tom. Our topic is the political will to foster entrepreneurship. And it seems to me that maybe a preliminary question is why political leadership is important to this at all. What if the politicians just got out of the way and let markets and entrepreneurs do their work?
With all due respect, after a couple glasses of wine, a cocktail party, and that's a silly comment. Because,
well, I don't know about that.
Because
I mean,
you would not have roads, you would not have an educational system as broken as it is, you would not have the infrastructure you need to be successful. It requires a partnership. And let me just say, today, besides the word innovation, the other...
I've heard the word partnership a lot.
Yeah,
partnership, collaboration.
I want to get to that. That's exactly what I want to talk about. Besides innovation, the other word I've heard ad nauseum today is collaboration. I think that word is an excuse for lack of leadership. Okay? And when I hear collaboration and consensus, that is a great, every politician loves that, because that puts you into process where they don't need to make a decision. If you're, so incrementally...
I think this is going to be fun.
Incrementally, I believe the collaboration is great. If you're talking about a fundamental strategic change, take the Idea District, a fundamental strategic, different view of San Diego, collaboration is going to slow you down. David will be an old man with gray hair by the time he gets that done if you talk about collaboration. You need to be prepared to run over people. And you need to be prepared. You know, most cities, most places in America are more interested in getting along with each other and being polite than getting things done. In this world today, I mean, so there's a role for government, but the government needs to match the urgency and the speed that an entrepreneur like Greg pursues. That's the challenge, and we have built a system, and we are fine with it, unfortunately, in this whole idea of having democracy, too much democracy. Okay, I think the two best cities in America over the last 20 years are Charleston, South Carolina, and Chicago, Illinois. And why is that? It's the closest we come to benevolent dictatorships in America.
Well, maybe you should
wake you all up? Are we over the wine now? Okay.
Well, maybe you should be speaking in Charlotte tonight. So
we live it, and with the Congress. I mean, think about what's going on in the federal government. I mean, we are watching people abdicate their responsibility every day.
All right. Well, what about this other thing we hear about all the time? These public-private partnerships. What are they? Is that bunk too?
No, I think that is where it happens. But this is about a leadership moment.
Okay, but what's the role of the leader to make sure those public-private partnerships are operating effectively?
On the public side, the role of the leader...
Well, ask Greg about the private side.
On the public side, the role of the leader is to be clear on the value of the deal for the city, the vision. So what happens in most cities, I see, and what real estate people typically do, it is about the transaction. We're going to develop this piece of property on this block, and this is the transaction. There needs to be a grown-up in the room who says that transaction needs to be seen in the context of a whole strategy for the city. And if it fits that vision, then let's make a deal. But it assumes that somebody understands the value structure of what is the city going to be about. And so I go to San Diego, which is a spectacular city and probably has one of the most spectacular, potentially spectacular waterfronts in the world, and it has surface parking on 3/4 of it. Is that the highest and best use of that property?
Well,
no, it's not, okay? But people have gotten used to it. Okay. And there's that is a reflection of lack of leadership.
Okay, so how does a benevolent dictator, what does a benevolent dictator do about those parking lots?
The benevolent dictator so you can have a weak mayor. I like strong mayors. I like people that can make decisions. But a strong mayor needs to be the one to bring the key people together to make the decision. And basically by either a bully pulpit or the force of the personality or the force of the office that person holds is to make use of it. What really is striking to me is how many people run for office and get power and are afraid to use it. That's what it's about. It is about your willingness, if you have this moment, to use power. To say, we have a value structure, a vision that is going to shape San Diego or shape Pittsburgh, and we're going to pursue that vision. Now, I'm not suggesting you don't have a loss of communication and conversation with the citizens and work hard to build that vision, but I'm going to say to you is if you go out and ask people to do a referendum about a vision, the odds are that it is going to be largely impossible to get people to buy in to something that is hard to see. Machiavelli said it well 600 years ago about change, right? In The Prince. How hard, the hardest thing in the world to do is change.
People don't want to change.
No, they don't. And every city in the world needs to change now.
Well, so listening to...
You're setting up for something.
He's enjoying it.
I'm shutting up now.
No, I want to come back, and then we can give Greg a turn. But, you sound, one often associates politicians with being risk averse. You don't sound particularly risk averse. You sound, when you talk about this, benevolent dictator and doing the kinds of things, getting the people together, making things happen, that sounds to me like the model of a private sector entrepreneurial leader.
Mayors have the power to do that, by and large.
But why don't more mayors take risks? Why is risk and political career?
Because we as voters give them a break.
So it's our fault.
Ultimately, it is.
So we get what we deserve.
We're electing people that value consensus and collaboration and not decision making.
And when you have interest groups that are as vested as they are, unless you have someone willing to break things up, nothing's going to happen.
That's exactly right.
Well, Greg, sort of the same question from your perspective. Let's just start with political leadership. What models, kinds of political leadership have you seen that work, that contribute to the kind of urban vitality and economic transformation that so many communities need? Or perhaps give us some examples of things that don't work. I mean, what should we be looking for?
So the first thing is that they work best when you empower the private sector to do what they do best. Those are the best things. And often when we go into regions and they say, we would like you to advise us on policy, to help design new policies. Tell us what new policies we should be creating to help entrepreneurs. And very often the first step is, let's not even go there. Let's look at what you've already done. Rules and regulations, frameworks that are already on the books that actually inhibit the process. Because very often when we all get in the room together, very often government can be the slowest person in the room and they can actually bog down the system. So we have to figure out. But the good question is governments for the first time are asking, what is our role? When you looked at the kind of birth of the Silicon Valley and the birth of the technology sectors, as we heard earlier, where they were based in defense and defense spending and defense technologies, what was different is that it was a closed system, that government funded the research, the high-risk efforts. In the middle part during the commercialization, private sector companies took it forth, but then the government bought the stuff on the back end. Now we have an open system where we take innovation and we develop it, and then it goes out into a marketplace. So now government is saying, what is our role? We understand that we take place at the high, up front in the high risk. We de-risk a lot of this, but we also want to be a player in the other pieces. How can we create an enabling infrastructure? The challenge with that, and we were doing a project with the UK under Gordon Brown, and what was interesting is that one of the questions they said is that generally when government gets a hold of these types of things, we tend to muck it up. How can we actually encourage this? And one of the things we found is that governments generally like to fund, they know how to fund projects. They don't know how to fund people. But the thing is that the most successful things come from human behavior, the way people act. And fundamentally what we're trying to do is get people to behave differently. If you go to places like Pittsburgh, or you go to places like San Diego and Silicon Valley, it's not that the people are smarter there or they have more money. They actually behave differently. And they've created systems for doing that. And government wants to figure out how to encourage and enable that behavior rather than let's just set up a new fund, let's set up an incubator, let's set up a tech park.
But when you say they don't have more money, but don't they have more money? I mean, look at where venture capital is in this country. It's in New York, it's in San Francisco, it's in Boston. I mean,
3 places.
Yeah, that's where it is, right? So isn't that a problem?
It's a huge problem.
So what do we do about it?
So a couple of things we're seeing. One is government is taking a more active role. In fact, globally, when the economy softened in 2008, traditional limited partner capital, so pension funds, endowments, had pulled back away for several reasons. But they did pull back. So the ability to get that risk capital from those traditional sources had disappeared. But at the same point, we actually saw government stepping forward and saying, we would like to help fund the stuff. We don't know what we're doing. And we're even willing to accept a blended return. In other words, we're willing to, rather than demanding 40% IRRs on our capital, we're fine if we just don't lose our money as long as there's economic development and economic capacity building going on in our regions. And so several places around the world are playing in that space. The other big area of risk capital that's flowing into the system is from foundations. So we were just at a meeting that the Gates Foundation hosted, where the Gates Foundation now has committed $1 billion of capital to the area of program-related investing. And the heads of every major foundation, from Ford and Rockefeller, MacArthur, Kellogg, we're all in the room saying, we want to figure out how we can invest like venture capitalists, alongside venture capitalists, to take equity in these small, innovative companies, but we don't know how, and we want to learn. So that's going to flood quite a bit of new capital into the system.
Yes. Well, let me ask something else, just staying on the private sector side. Let's say you're in a region or in a city where you don't have a Medici, you know, a mayor who's read The Prince and is taking risks and is just forcing things through. To hell with what the people think. But what is the business leader to do? I mean, their motivation is their own bottom line, typically. The entrepreneur, you know, it's shareholder value, and if he's the only shareholder, it's his own value. What can possibly create this culture in the absence of strong political leadership? I mean, if it's just the entrepreneurs without that kind of leadership, what happens?
What happens is that very often the entrepreneurs go somewhere else, because they go to where there's an enabling system.
So you would say, you would agree then that the political leadership is absolutely essential to this?
I think it is. First of all, I think leadership is just important. We can say political, but I think leadership is absolutely critical.
But I'm talking about political leadership. If it doesn't come from the political sector, where is it going to come from? You talk about foundations. Where is the incentive to produce these things that aren't necessarily just bottom line?
Oh, you mean the social impact?
Yeah.
Well, it's actually coming from society. It's interesting that the private sector has a tremendous need. And in fact, in the work we're doing with the Aspen Institute, what we believe is that the best way to create social impact is created by sustainable economic opportunities. It's not charitable type of social impact. It's the kind where if you can enable people to be able to create jobs that are green, but make money at it, that's far more sustainable than if you just kind of give a handout.
Tom, I want to come back to you and just ask you to talk a little bit about Pittsburgh. I mean, we hear a lot about Pittsburgh. Many of us have seen how Pittsburgh was transformed. I think, you know, I don't know when it was, well before you were mayor, Pittsburgh was described as hell with a lid off. Right. And then, you know, which is a wonderful description. And then, you know, not too long ago, what is it, both Forbes or Fortune and The Economist have Pittsburgh up at the very top of the list.
We're actually ranked as the most livable city in America. So, sorry, San Diego.
So
let me go back to the leadership, because
okay.
The reality is, I don't know the history of San Diego, but San Diego moves from a sleepy naval town to an entrepreneurial success story because of a public-private small group of people. Some business leaders and the mayor at the time get the university system in California to invest in a world-class engineering. This is probably in the 70s and late 80s. They set aside property that was vacant, could have been used for something else, for a technology. Probably the best story in America is the Research Triangle, and where literally 6 business people get together out of a true story of a rain dark golf game, lamenting the fact that their sons and daughters go to college and then have no reason to come back to Raleigh, Durham, or Chapel Hill because there's no jobs. And they buy 7,000 acres of property and create what we know now as the Research Triangle, and drag, kicking and screaming, the universities and the political leadership of the local communities and the state along. So leadership can come from a lot of places. David, where did we do the tour today? In the Space for Art. Give you an example. Here are 2 people sort of kicking and screaming, dragging San Diego into a different point of view about how to use old buildings instead of tearing them down. So you have a lot of leadership examples, okay? I think, and that's part of the challenge. That's what we faced in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, when I'm growing up as a young boy, 60% of the people in Pittsburgh worked in heavy manufacturing. Between 1970 and 1990, we saw all the steel mills close. We lost, in those 20 years, 500,000 people left Pittsburgh. That's why there are so many Steeler fans here when we play the Chargers, okay? And all those people that have a connection to Pittsburgh, we failed you. We couldn't keep you there because you didn't see opportunity for yourself. And so I was a legislator for a while. Through the 80s, I'm becoming mayor. We are in a full-scale collapse as a city. We are looking at thousands of acres. And so I make a fundamental decision. I can continue to manage decline, or I want to change the rules and not manage decline. Sort of manage for a city that is thinking about how to grow itself again. And what does that mean? It means that we need to fundamentally rethink how we do business. So we're broke as a city. Every city is broke, but every city has a lot of money. We had a $500 million budget. I can go to the San Diego mayor and they say, David's idea of an idea factory or an idea district is great, but we don't have any money. What's the budget of San Diego? $750 million? Sure you have money. It's about priorities. And I can say all the priorities are going to be just to do the gerbil on the wheel. Sort of staying in place, investing in the potholes, and hiring more police. We made a fundamental decision, 3 decisions. We were going to create our own risk capital. We cut the police force, cut the city workforce, and created a Pittsburgh Development Fund of $60 million. First 6 months that I was mayor, we did that. The second 6 months, we bought 1,500 acres of steel mills that had sit there, sort of the image of Pittsburgh as a vacant steel mill. Money, land, and deal making. That's what you need to bring those together. And so when Greg shows up and says, Mayor, I have a great deal for you, because now he sees we're open for business, I say to Greg, with all due respect, you tell me why it's a great deal for you. We'll decide whether it's a great deal for us. And if our self-interests meet, we'll figure out how to make it work.
Well, I can think of a lot of other cities in the Midwest that had a trajectory very much like Pittsburgh that are still going in the wrong direction. What is different? Is it you know, are you just going to be?
I'm Irish. I love conflict. I'm not afraid of conflict. A lot of people are afraid of conflict, okay? So when I'm making decisions to reduce the police force and buying 1,500 acres of vacant steel mills, my opponents are saying, the mayor's wasting our money, we ought to be hiring more police. That is a fundamental decision today that every city can make. Whether you're going to invest in today or whether you're willing to take some of your energy and resources and invest in tomorrow. And if cities aren't investing in tomorrow, like the Idea District, they will never get to the tomorrow. That's the fundamental challenge of every city in the world. They need to take some of their resources that are in great demand today, because everybody's broke, and say, we're going to take a risk with these resources.
So we come back to this idea of risk.
It's about being entrepreneurial.
It comes back to being entrepreneurial.
Absolutely.
It's the same kind of assumption of risk. And your citizens, you know, the voters in Pittsburgh, I mean, were they skeptical initially, or were things so bad that they were willing to take a risk with you?
It was probably relatively easier for us, but it was still very difficult. There was a percentage of the population, thank goodness a majority, because I won 3 elections, okay, but each by a closer margin, I want you to know, okay? I don't know that I'd have won a 4th one. There was a percentage of the people who got the future. There was a percentage of the people who wanted the old Pittsburgh. Couldn't see it. And you know, I learned a fundamental lesson. My wife and I were in the Peace Corps many years ago, and we lived in a remote village in Paraguay. And We spoke Spanish. A few miles through the jungle was Brazil. They spoke Portuguese. All around us were Indian tribes who spoke a variety of different languages. And the enduring lesson we learned was that the most powerful person in the town wasn't the person with all the guns or all the money. It was the person who spoke all the languages. And the person who is the people that we undervalue greatly in American society. When we came back here, we realized we are divided by race, by class, where we work. I probably couldn't understand half the things he would be talking about if he talked about his job. And the most powerful person in a conversation should be the translator. To translate sort of, and so as mayor, my job was to sort of translate what Pittsburgh could be and to figure out how to communicate to people a place for them there. That was hugely difficult, and I failed a lot of times in doing that. That is the challenge in America today. It is to figure out how you communicate a place for a world that's getting turned upside down. For somebody, it is sitting here stuck in the old San Diego or the old Pittsburgh, and to give them a sense of hope that there's a place for them in the future. And that is the hardest thing for anybody in elective office to do. It is so much easier to be a demagogue and to say, we're going to bring back the good old San Diego.
I think I think another part of that is that as we move into knowledge economies, the workforce of today has choices. They can choose where to work, even how to work. We can work at our homes, or we can work in the cloud, or we can go into an office. We're no longer a rocks, crops, and metal, society where we have to be near a harbor, we have to be near an airport. And because of those choices, there's a tremendous competition for knowledge resources. And because those people do have choices, they're going to go to places that, we hear this term business friendly, but it's certainly so much more than that, where there's enlightened leadership, where geeks can be near other geeks.
Well, business friendly usually means to people, regulations, lack of regulation. Yeah. But you're not talking about that at all.
Not at all.
You're talking about the culture.
You look at here in California.
Right.
In some ways, we have some of the most business unfriendly policies and systems. But people come here because geeks love to be near other geeks. We A players like to play with other A players. And the reason you go to the Valley, these are highly self-selecting systems. It's not as if people say, God, am I going to go to Chicago or I'm going to San Diego? They choose things for very, very different reasons. And they choose them for a balance of life and work-life balances, for resources, but also for opportunity. And in places like the Valley, Herzliya, you find these nets of employment to where if I go work at eBay, it doesn't work out, I just change parking spaces. It's what we call the parking lot principle. We just change parking spaces. That the assumption of risk. So when we go into regions, one of the first things we hear from almost everybody is we don't have a risk-taking culture and we don't like failure. And I said, guess what? There's no one that likes that. We don't like that in the Valley or in San Diego anymore. The reason that it tends to work is because we have systems that allow people to learn fast, try things quickly, learn fast, fail small, and evolve rapidly. We'd rather have people fail lots and lots of times, and we would love it if we could give every entrepreneur, I believe that every entrepreneur with a great idea should get just enough money to fail. And if we can create systems, and
where are they going to get the money?
Absolutely. So where they get the money is if you go to programs like Techstars or Y Combinator, they give entrepreneurs just enough money just to show proof of relevance and what they're doing. It's no longer proof of concept. It's not enough just to show that it works. You have to show that people actually care about what you're doing. And then surround yourself with a network that can help you validate that. But the capital will come from, some will come from government, but a lot of it will come from the private sector. Right now at Y Combinator in the Valley, every company that gets accepted in the program gets $150,000 right off the bat. They get in the program, they get the money to do it. And then it ends up building upon itself.
Well, this is much too much fun for me to just take by myself. So let me offer up these two remarkable people to all of you as well. I think we have a microphone. Otherwise, I will keep at it myself. Who has the microphone, by the way?
Catch.
Okay, we've got a couple of people over at this table. If you could come over here. Gentleman in the white shirt.
Is it on? All right. Thank you very much. You guys are a breath of fresh air. I'm Irish too, and it was when I once had someone tell me that San Diego's the dumb blonde of cities.
No, that's the first time I've heard that description.
I like it though.
Why don't you embellish it?
I think it's time we got into things a little more. I was dying to ask this question in the previous panel. I was absolutely stunned when Mary Walshock said San Diego has a sense of possibility. When I go to Phoenix, Los Angeles, Dallas, Houston, Denver, I see a sense of possibility. When I come to San Diego, I don't know what the heck's going on. Good example. I believe Pittsburgh had an election as to whether or not they should build a new ballpark in around 1998.
Right.
And the people voted it down.
Right.
San Diego had an election to build a new...
By 70%.
By 70%.
2 months later, I said we were going to do it anyhow.
Well, you're ruining my story. San Diego had an election to build a ballpark at the same time. It won 60% to 40. Pittsburgh got a new ballpark 4 years earlier than San Diego. San Diego's ballpark
and we built the best ballpark in America.
Well,
according to ESPN.
Pittsburgh is a beautiful ballpark. But I don't know, I heard all this collaboration, I heard the sense of possibility. Why does it not go to the civic realm? And why does it not go to the built environment? When I go to Torrey Pines Mesa, I see a sterile, impersonal, auto-oriented collection of buildings that are either edifices built for somebody's ego or the lowest, cheapest thing you can build for practicality. There are no people there. Why does innovative industry cluster around that kind of crap?
I don't believe they do. But the Torrey Mesa, first of all, has a high propensity of life science companies located there, and life sciences companies in general, particularly if they're biotechnology, tend to be a lot more linear in process, and so managing costs, getting them out, they're not as much built on the creative economy models as some of the more technology-oriented ones. If you go to Los Angeles and you see what they've done in Culver City, and you see what people like Frederick Smith did with Samotar, completely different story, where they spend all the time, or what IDEO does, when they design their purpose-built environments to, they think very hard about how to increase the amount of creativity and collaboration. Whereas in these more life science-oriented places, we just need, the wet lab and what we need.
So how many architects in the room? So let me ask you all a question. What were you all smoking and drinking in the 60s and 70s? Because we tried, so much of what was built then was not for human scale. You ask a fundamental question. This is about the value structure I talked about before. This is a choice a community makes of whether it wants to be, it's like a disease in the water. Whether you want to be an it'll-do community, we're going to build, that's all we can afford, it'll do. Or whether you want to be a world-class community. You build a pedestrian bridge down by the Hilton Hotel that's world-class. You're building a library that's world-class. And so you've built some remarkable buildings. They're choices a community makes. I know it took you 20 years to do the library, but you're building a world-class library in downtown. And I think that reflects a community's, in part, a community's value structure. So your waterfront doesn't reflect well on you right now, though you're working on it. And so they're the kinds of day-to-day decisions, and that's where the public and civic leadership needs to come in. There needs to be to say, we're going to do something, it's going to be world-class. We're going to build a convention center, it's going to be a world-class convention center. There's a value structure that a community needs to build into its DNA. And my sense of San Diego is that you're sort of in the midst of trying to write that value structure, but you haven't sort of gotten to it yet. Because you see some remarkable success stories, and then maybe some not so success stories. So I think that's part of the challenge.
What I really appreciate about what David and Pete and the guys are doing at IDEA is that they're actually bringing design fundamentals and design thinking into the whole innovation process. And up until now, we have not seen a collective effort in that area. We've only seen little pockets of it where people have really kind of brought that new, fresh thinking.
I just would
If
go.
you could just give us your name too, please.
Tim Tosta from San Francisco. I think that you're doing a lot of reductionism on how you get to the end of the line. And you've said a couple of really interesting things, Tom, about how the community defines itself and what its values are. And so one of the issues I would like, or values I'd like to identify, is the power of the leader to listen.
Right.
Because you know, in the post having wine and talking in a panel, one of the things that's lost is, even though you have a forceful Irish way of pronouncing
Right.
what you're doing, you're also very closely listening to what the community's asking for.
Absolutely.
And I don't think there's when you're in a highly organic and quickly moving community like San Diego has been, it's really hard to hear a drumbeat if it's outside your culture, if it's outside your ability to hear. So I think that in many communities, there's a talent that we have to identify for knowing what really is going on in the value structure and being able to deal with it and identify something that's going to take a longer period of time than you may be able to hear for. So you can't listen for the history. You've got to listen for the future. Does that make sense?
I mean, and here's the dilemma. I mean, I'm a community organizer by training, Saul Alinsky. If you follow Obama, he was trained by the nefarious Saul Alinsky. So was I, okay? And so I start out from a grassroots up. Part of the dilemma, I mean, and this is the leadership issue, is it is very hard for the average citizen dealing with crime and potholes and all the other stuff to think about what the future ought to be. And so there is a whole listening, and we work very hard to do that. But then the translation of getting people to buy into, we're going to take these risks to get there, is a huge issue. And I want to touch something we've not talked about, which is how you pay for this. Okay, is that we're a flat broke city. And you know, and nobody wants to raise taxes. But the reality is we live in the big lie theory of government right now. If I listen to Greg and everybody else, the most important competitive advantages of a city are this education and its vibrancy. And that requires significant public investment. I understand the majority of your legislature, as is the case in Pennsylvania, has signed pledges that they will never, under any circumstances, raise taxes. That is being pure demagogues. If I look across the country, there's a direct correlation between the high tax places, like Boston and San Francisco and Seattle, and the most successful places. If you want low taxes, why isn't everybody flocking to Mississippi? You know, we need to get over this, that people don't have to pay to be successful. It is, for me, outrageous that we would take a position like that in this day and age, is that we need to pay for this if you're going to be world class. In the kind of quality of buildings you build, in the education you provide your kids, in the kind of infrastructure you provide. That's all about the public, making the kinds of investments that generate the kind of interest that Greg wants to have.
Right over here, please.
Okay. San Diego in 1980, we had a mayor who
Your name, please?
Pete Garcia. 1980, San Diego, we had a mayor with balls, Pete Wilson. He took a piece of land on the Mesa, and he picked a few real estate developers, including my company, and he gave us the land at a bargain price, and said, go out and find medical companies. Nobody knew what that meant. My company found 2 scientists in a trailer at UCSD who talked to us about nude mice and anticlonal antibodies. Nobody knew how to spell biopharmaceutical. We, a private company, we bet the farm and designed and built the first wet lab and vivarium in San Diego. We would pray every month that the rent check would clear. The venture capital company who funded that company said, we'll give you the money, but you have to build it in San Francisco. They call, the two scientists call and say, we have these knuckleheads in San Diego who's willing to build us this whole thing for just a monthly check. And they said, well, okay, then go ahead and build it in San Diego. Roll the film forward. We have over 40,000 people in the biopharmaceutical industry in San Diego. But it took leadership from elected official, public money, because that was public land that he gave us for, you know, for us to be willing to take that risk, private capital, and the research out of UC San Diego. So we can do it here in San Diego. We just need the right elements. We don't have them right now.
But one thing
now,
that,
let me say one more thing. Those campuses are grassy, leafy, or obsolete. For the bio industry, they're fine. But the cohort of highly educated, talented people want an urban environment. So we need to transfer all those things that we did in the suburbs and become a 21st century city, not just a 20th century city, and build our urban core to the level of places like Seattle, Portland, the Bay Area, and so forth and so on. And that's really what we need to look at the future, not just the past.
What's also important about what Pete's saying is that they did, these real estate people acted as venture capitalists. They invested in the companies the way a VC would invest in them. The same way attorneys here in San Diego actually invest in the companies. You can usually get, from most of the law firms here in town, you can get deferral of up to $25,000 of your fees until you get funded. And they do that on a regular basis. So the investments are more than just the people like myself. It's all these other people that also finance these companies.
In front.
Vaughan Davies. I am an architect, but I've got very quickly transformed into a public placemaker. And most urban cities, at least 60% of the land that we think of as a city is not built, not with buildings. It's streets and sidewalks and empty waterfronts, parking lots. How do we make people change their idea of the value of that, which Pittsburgh did? The public realm is beautiful. In most great urban cities, the public realm is first class and unsurpassed if it's going to be successful. And I believe that's the place for innovation and meeting new people and ideas and thoughts. So how do we change the focus from being buildings and insular to public and open and ideas?
It's about the vision. I mean, that's the point, is it is about growing up in the room, seeing not just transactions, but a vision of how they fit together and what they're going to create. And by the way, surface parking lots are like the deadliest land use in the world, okay? And part of it is about how cities manage land, who owns the land, and how you manage it. And cities own a lot of property that is sort of just sitting there rather than using it as a way to make a deal, like Pete just talked about. And so for me, this is about the public sector being market sensitive. Do I sound like a Republican? It's about the I'm a Democrat actually. It's about understanding what you need to do to get a David or a Pete or a lot of other of you to want to invest in a steel mill. And what is it that you need to do to compete in the market for that capital that would go to a greenfield somewhere else because there's some risk involved in doing a steel mill. And so how do you make that investment? Let me mention one final thing. This is fundamentally not, it's about a leadership, but it's also about institutional capacity. It is having on the public side a sophisticated team of people who can make the deal. You know, I can talk about this for 5 minutes.
Well, you should.
But
how about 3
I had a
minutes?
really good group of people who understood how to do deals.
And did you hire them, or were they
Yeah,
there?
I hired them by and large. Yeah.
Out of the private sector?
A lot of them, yeah. And some of them, you know, they're addicted to the public sector, but they were very sophisticated. It is about understanding the market. So when a developer comes in and says, I have a great deal, I want to build this idea.
So you've got the people
And I need $5 million to make it happen, we might say, you know what, we love the idea, but you don't need the $5 million because the market is going to support that. So good luck, and we'll do the infrastructure and the public stuff, but you don't need the subsidy for the deal. On the other hand, we might say, you need the $5 million, we'll give you a long-term patient loan. We want to pay back as it succeeds.
Cheryl Nichols, Space for Art, which is in East Village, which is located in the densest part of low-income housing in San Diego. It's not far from the waterfront. It's a block from where the proposed future Chargers ballpark would go. I would like to address the notion of a black hole on the waterfront that would be just parking lot, would block the waterfront, and that is the ballpark. Because that seems to be a place where people think it should go, even though there's no sense to the traffic. That would be an absolute nightmare coming in out of it. I don't get it. I don't get why we can't be like Chicago and put in a Millennium Park along the waterfront for a fraction of what a ballpark costs. A ballpark, as everybody knows who's done urban's, you know, the land evaluation and the cost of a ballpark, $1 billion we say here. The good old boys want a ballpark. It has nothing to do with urban development. For a fraction of that, we could have an incredible waterfront. People would have access to the water. The ballpark can go anywhere. They would have much better access. Why does it have to be there? I don't get it. When the arts, when culture, when we could have an idea district, when we can have a dynamic downtown that wouldn't be destroyed by a huge parking lot on the water. I could rant and rave about this a long time, but I just want to say that, you know, we have what is our political structure supporting? Hotels that block the waterfront. Everything is to barricade the people from the water and from great public spaces. There's so much potential here.
That didn't seem like a question asked of either of you, but would either of you like to comment?
With trepidation.
I sort of thought you'd take it.
I would say you're setting up for yourself a false choice. You can do both. Yes, absolutely can. Go to Pittsburgh and look. We built a baseball park, a football stadium, and a new convention center with $70 million new park, all along in front of it. You could do both. And EDAW, used to be EDAW, was the designer of the park, okay? Rather than have that kind of battle that paralyzes a community, it is better in many ways to think about how you use the ballpark and the good old boys and the willingness of them to do this to get to what you want. That's a classic community organizing thing. And I think you don't have to set up the choice. You can do both in many ways. And I think that is what is about creating a vision for the city. Rather than setting the vision up to make choices, false choices in many ways, is to think about a broad vision that can encompass both.
We have a question over here.
Uwe Brandis, I'm on staff at ULI. Greg, I have a question for you. We heard a little bit this afternoon around this kind of concept of not just setting up innovation, collaboration networks within cities, but beginning to think about how that collaboration happens on the global stage. And with the just unbelievable capital formation that's happening in Asia, and global markets going through such a radical transformation in a very short period of time in emerging markets. Can you talk a little bit about what in this leadership theme, what needs to happen within communities? Where does the kind of investment and innovation process go, given that so many economies around the world are really changing very rapidly, and they're changing in a way that's very urban?
So a couple ways. One is we often define innovation a little too narrowly, where we think it has to be products that we develop internally, and then we develop them and we push them out to the market. But a lot of the world's economies are actually creating the greatest economic impact with what we call reverse innovation. So if you look at Alibaba or Baidu in China, two of their biggest companies, those were not innovations they developed there. They basically took Skype and Google. And eBay, and took the models and brought them in. Every country we go to now has a Groupon clone. So one is how we think about innovation. The second way, in terms of the finance part of it, is governments are becoming much smarter about it. It used to be that when governments would set up capital funds, they would locally restrict them, saying if you have this money, you must invest within this 10 square mile radius. They certainly are opening that up a lot greater. In fact, many of them are requiring co-investments. So like what Israel did in the 90s is now what other places are doing, saying, we'll gladly give you $5 to invest in this company, but before we give it to you, you have to demonstrate that you've got $5 from somewhere else. And if you could demonstrate that, and it doesn't matter where it comes from, we will put it together. And so we're seeing new funds out of Chile, Colombia, we're seeing them in the Middle East that are welcoming co-investment of either taking that capital and bringing it to fund US companies, or how can we take our own San Diego companies and take them into the Latin America market, take them into the Asia market, take them into the Europe market. And there's we're finding a lot of dollars. It's just actually how you can be smarter in terms of identifying those partnerships and then forming them.
I'll ask one. William Hamilton is my name. Tom, you've spoken a lot about what you've done with the decisions you made with taxpayer dollars. Can you tell us what mistakes you made with taxpayer dollars and what you learned from them?
For me, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I made a lot of mistakes. We did some investments in our downtown that hindsight was terrible. I mean, we were we were driven by the dream of a Nordstrom's in downtown Pittsburgh, and we're willing to give them the store, in effect, and made investments that cost taxpayer money and were bad investments. Ended up not working like we wanted. The Nordstrom's never came, and it ended up being a bad investment. So I mean, that's the nature of
what's taking risk.
That's the nature of taking risk. I mean, so there are others that we bought some steel mill sites that took a lot longer to develop than we thought, and required more money than we thought, and so it was a longer period of time. But overall, I mean, there's been a lot of studies done about this. Our returns on our investment in terms of increased tax revenues, really were far superior to what anybody expected in terms of our returns. We have the Pittsburgh Development Fund I talked about has now turned over 3.5 times. So people have paid money back. We've learned, even though we've lost some and didn't get some back, we've more than recovered from other deals we did and have put it back into additional deals, and that continues to go on. So my biggest failure probably was to be able to communicate where Pittsburgh was going. It's pretty clear now, but this is 10 years ago, where Pittsburgh was going to a large segment of the Pittsburgh population who had come out of the steel mills, who couldn't conceive of themselves working for a technology company, or getting the skills they needed to do that, and they left Pittsburgh. And so that was a very painful part of being mayor and seeing that you just were failing people like that. Probably the biggest mistake I made.
Let me just ask, again, thinking about Pittsburgh, and we've talked a lot, we've heard a lot today about the role of universities, role of community colleges. Talk to us about the kind of leadership you had in the university, in the higher education sector in Pittsburgh, and how important that was, or wasn't.
Well, there are two pieces to us, and I don't think you have this equivalent. We have an organization called the Allegheny Conference on Community Development that was the CEOs of the major companies in Pittsburgh, just the CEOs meeting. It started in the 1950s, and they expanded to include the big foundations and the university presidents. And they were very much our partners in all this. We were providing some of the leadership, but they were there when we were going to our state legislature and others to get the state to change laws that permit us to move more quickly on developing property and everything like that. So that was one piece of it. The other is we had at Carnegie Mellon University particularly an extraordinary leader who really helped me to see this. When I ran for office, I ran on crime, taxes, and getting jobs, okay? And the idea of the universities, this would be going back into the 80s, the idea of the universities of an economic engine for a region was relatively new. You didn't really hear about that. Universities did what they did, research, educate people. And the idea of how universities in a community, the civic and political leadership, come together to make the university the economic engine of the region was, for us, revolutionary. And I'm going to say to you, Carnegie Mellon University is remarkable. They got it. There are companies like Google that have significant presence in Pittsburgh because of Carnegie Mellon University and hundreds of startups. The University of Pittsburgh, much bigger, lot more research dollars, have a much lower rate of commercialization. So there is within the universities, I've seen and looked at this around the country, and Greg could probably talk about this, a real difference in culture of universities.
That's fascinating.
Touch on that.
Well, in fact, our new chancellor here at UCST, we poached from Carnegie Mellon, so we do that very well, by the way. Universities are an engine. They're engines for several reasons. One is, of course, they do attract research dollars and they turn those into new ideas which become new products and services. But even more important, they're the talent engines, because even if you find an entrepreneur who can find a good idea, in order for that company to have economic impact in the region, you have to build a workforce around them. And the challenge with that, and it's like changing a tire on a car that's moving, is that if I were to ask you what is the most disruptive company, what's going to be the Facebook or the Google in 20 years? And the answer is we don't have the slightest idea. And not only do we not know what it is, it probably hasn't even been thought of yet. And there's even a good chance that the person who is going to invent it may not even been born yet. You know, and so if those things are constantly in flux, how do we build education systems? How do we build infrastructure? How do we build programs to actually meet the demands of needs that we don't even know what they are? And the answer is you have to build systems that are highly responsive, flexible, adaptable. And that's what we find in very innovative regions, is that they find ways of responding to needs very quickly. If it doesn't work out, they course correct. It's called pivoting. They do that. When they make mistakes, they admit they make mistakes, they get on with it, and they just keep moving forward rather than admitting failure.
Did we have another question out there? I can't see. Okay, what I'd like to do then, we're coming up to 9 o'clock, is ask each of our panelists perhaps to share any concluding thoughts, remarks, things that you didn't have a chance to talk to us about.
I just want to end with this. I was here as a Peace Corps volunteer training 40 years ago. And I saw San Diego as a sleepy naval town. And you sell yourself short. You're a remarkable place. You have arguably one of the most naturally beautiful places in the country, if not the world. You have weather that we in Pittsburgh would die for. You have one of the real success stories in creating a technology driver. You have some really great decisions in how you've developed your city. You're like a jigsaw puzzle. The pieces are all on the table. The challenge for all of you is whether you have the community will to put them together to build truly the spectacular city that you should be. It's about you. It's about who you pick to lead you, and it's about how you engage in the conversation. That's what it's about.
Building on what Tom was just saying, I think that one thing that all cities can do better on is youth engagement, that these millennials who are coming into the workforce think and behave a lot differently. They're the Twitter generation, Facebook. They look a little different. I think we don't just should be talking about incubating companies. I think we need to incubate leaders, including these young leaders. For those of you who've seen the movie Something Ventured, which is about the birth of the venture capital industry, you'll see an interview with Arthur Rock, who talks about his first meeting with Steve Jobs and Wozniak when they came in. And he said when these guys came in, he was immediately not only turned off, he was actually repulsed. He said, first of all, Steve Jobs smelled really badly. He was arrogant. They have attention deficit. They look funny. And you want to know something? Those are the people who create all the impact. So it's how do we kind of help encourage and nurture and develop this next generation of young leaders who are going to create the impact? How do we create the systems to allow them? So it's not just about the land and the spaces. The other thing is, how do we tap into the intellectual capacity of the community better to both communicate with them and to learn what's important to them? How do we use things like grand challenges to drive the innovation? How do we encourage civic discourse? You know, we believe in the process of debate, decide, delegate, and deliver. You know, and how do you kind of encourage those things to happen? I sit on the board of the Economic Development Corporation. I don't know if Mark's here in the room, but and Connect. And one thing that we need to do a better job, even here in San Diego, you look around the room, everyone's over 50 years old, and yet we need to get, there you go. We need to get the young people. We need to get the more energy and more involvement going.
Well, on behalf of everyone here, I'd like to thank Tom and Greg for this wonderful. And let me also ask, are there any logistical concluding remarks that, wonderful. Thank you.
So, how'd you feel about the first few courses? Okay, so just briefly, on the menu tomorrow is an extraordinary lineup of talent, of hopefully provocative presentations, from IDEO to Pixar to what's the magic that South of Market and Austin can share with us, to Alan Weber's discussion about what's happening with cities. Excuse me, Josep Piqué, who's an invited guest from Barcelona, is going to talk about one of the really inspiring innovation districts in the world, 22 at Barcelona. We have some case studies from energy work that was done, innovation energy work that was done by students at 3 leading universities. And then when your brain bucket is completely full, we're going to get you into groups so that you can talk about, what does this mean? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to the initiatives that you're working on? How can you now synthesize all of this input in a way that is helpful and usable as you start to think about, what are we going to do next? Thank you. Thank you, Selena. And then we'll end with a summation of the key insights. As you, I think, know, we're going to be putting together a report from this forum that will be then used as an agenda for 2013. So it's going to be very valuable, I think, on a lot of levels for us to pull together the key insights, the key questions, and areas for further study at the end of the session. And then for those who are so inclined, then you have the opportunity to go to the art fair tomorrow night. In terms of logistics, we have a bus, which I think is right outside for those who are going back to the W. You should keep your name tags because you're going to need them for tomorrow. We'd like to have them so that you can identify yourself for tomorrow. We start here at, I think, 7:30. For those who want to have a continental breakfast here, we'll be starting at 7:30. And the program starts at 8:30 sharp. And we will start on time because, as I just described, there's lots of ground to cover, and we want to make sure we have an opportunity for you to continue to have this, opportunity to talk with each other and network with each other. Alina, where is she? That covers everything? Okay. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow.